Hi, my name is William Rentz. I am a student of Dr. Audrey Phillips, and I am a student of IB Literature and Language, and today's date is October 16th, 2017. My primary text title for my FOA is Turn the Corner, written by Anita Laraya in 2016. It is a nonfiction book, and it follows the IB global context of identities and relationships. My secondary text title is Ratatouille, a Disney movie directed by Brad Bird on June 29th, 2007, the date of release. The genre is comedic fiction, and the IB global context is personal and cultural expression. My tertiary text title is Fixer Upper, the episode Sweet Surprise at the Silos, Season 4, Episode 11. The producers are Scott Feely and Michael Matsumoto, and it was released on February 14th, 2017. The genre is reality TV and nonfiction, and the context is scientific and technical innovation. My inquiry questions are: how are stereotypes created in media? How do media reinforce stereotypes? And how are the media critical of these stereotypes? Every time one turns on the TV, reads a newspaper, checks social media, or sees a billboard along a roadway, they are exposed to different forms of media. In North American society, we don't often put much thought into what we see unless it appears as threatening or morally wrong to us. However, the media at times does create stereotypes relating to race and gender, and we don't usually put much thought into it. For example, in the HGTV show Fixer Upper, we see a family that's really happy that has parents that flip houses for a living, and the show is enjoyed by many age groups of many different classes in the American public. However, this show does create a stereotype, my apologies, of men doing the hard work while women do the easier, simpler jobs. This is presented by Chip Gaines doing the majority of manual labor in a renovation, while his wife Joanna shows off her skills of decorating towards the end of every episode. The nonfiction book Turn the Corner, written by Anita Laraya, speaks of stereotypes like this, particularly from the woman's point of view, as she is an outspoken feminist. She describes much of her personal experiences as a woman growing up in the early 70s and 80s, 1970s and 80s, don't ever get that confused with 18 or 1770s and 80s, when fewer women were in the workplace than men, in United States and England as well. This caused a more negative view towards the jobs that women were assigned to carry out, and women were seen as less competent than men in the workplace. Laraya believes that this stigma still carries over to the 21st century, and she speaks of sexual violence against women, usually perpetrated by men. She speaks of how the men who partake in these garish actions use it as a way to show their dominance over women. Her primary example is in the U.S. military, where sexual harassment and violence occur there. Since 93% of the demographic in the U.S. military are men, the culture is a very masculine, predominantly male culture, while the female crowd is somewhat suppressed. Page 21, Turn the Corner, Anita Laraya. She believes that although only 0.9% of men have ever done anything unconsensual to women, this being unconsensual sexual acts, the reason that there still is 0.9% is because of the stereotype that men are more powerful than women, and men use these sexual violent acts to show their powerful dominance over women. Quote from the book, page 21. A counterstatement to the media stereotypes is the Disney movie Ratatouille, set in Paris, France, directed by Brad Bird. Referring back to my example of HGTV, women are often thought to enjoy the kitchen over men. However, Ratatouille's plot goes completely against this and shows all the chefs being men, with the exception of Chef Colette being a woman. And the universal stereotype of a woman is that she's passive. However, Colette is anything but passive. Her harsher character exemplifies when she uses knives to keep Chef Linguini on the table so that he doesn't run away. This meaning she held his coat down. She didn't actually use, knives and threaten him. She did use knives. Okay, let's continue. This criticizes the stereotype that women are a kind, caregiving, passive person. Always. HGTV's Fixer Upper is widely enjoyed by the American public. The show is began being produced in 2013, that is, and it relates to Chip and Joanna Gaines of Waco, Texas, renovating houses and showing them off to the homeowners who requested design changes. However, what most do not think of when watching the show is that it appears to create a stereotypical gender role that women are passive and that they enjoy the kitchen. This role is that men also always do the manual labor. In these episodes, Sweet Surprise at the Silos, Chip and Joanna are renovating their property at the silos, and Chip does all the heavy work of knocking out the walls with his crew of men. Notice how I say men because there's no women on his crew. And overhauling the house, while Joanna Gaines pretty much just bakes the whole episode and decorates the bake shop at the silos. After she's usually in every episode, it's up to Chip and his crew to overhaul every project until Joanna puts all the decorative pieces in the house. This motif creates the stereotype that manual labor and heavy lifting is a man's job, and that men are always assigned to these jobs, while women are assigned the easier, softer jobs, particularly making things look pretty. Turn the Corner is a story of Anita Laria's personal experience traveling to London, England, and working in the alcohol sales industry, which was thought of as a male-dominated industry. Her coworkers were 9 men who she thought were very rowdy and had a wild nature. And being the only women in her environment, I almost made it sound plural there, in her environment, especially in the 1970s and 80s, the stereotype that women performed poorly compared to men had an effect on her. Drinking alcohol was seen as something men preferred over women, both in the U.S. and England, and alcohol was seen as something that was manly, as I just said. Her coworkers thought her approach to the job was not strong enough because of her gender, and the author does not bring up specific examples of this, however she does give a general idea of what she dealt with in the scenario. Following along with the text's main idea of gender-based stereotypes, the author brings up the movie Wolf of Wall Street as an example of stereotypical masculine behavior, and shows how it's a decorative enzyme to society. This behavior includes that of an all-boys club, as stated on page 91 of Turn the Corner. I'm not acquainted with this concept of an all-boys club, however, I can assume that she speaks of sexual talk and attempts to constantly prove who's manlier. Laria targets her audience towards young adults, those aged 18 to 30, and she thinks that they appear to be the least educated on the issues of double standards, binge drinking, sexual assault, etc., etc. To the American public, Turn the Corner would appeal to a female audience rather than a male audience, because most of the people that she speaks of that are positive figures are women, and she's a woman, she's an outspoken feminist, she speaks of women's issues. She doesn't really care that much about men's issues. Every sentence of this book is different, but they follow the didactic theme of how media and society portrays double standards and stereotypes, and how they continue to be a worse issue than someone's feelings being hurt. Throughout the book, the author does have a bias towards women in that they're always the victim of these. However, the issues brought up in every chapter affect both men and women. The ideas of her book relate more to how the media reinforce stereotypes, as she talks about the ideas of women being perceived as a weaker gender. Although Turn the Corner talks about media reinforcing stereotypes, other media doesn't always follow that idea. The Disney movie Ratatouille, directed by Brad Bird, is based for younger children and actually follows a paradox of gender stereotypes. It's set in Paris, France, but it targets an American audience, and it was released for the American public. And hidden in the plot is a contradictory statement to American stereotypes. Sorry for the overusage of the word American. When speaking of the aforementioned contradictory statement, we refer to the idea that women are always the cooks, and the idea that they're also more passive than men. However, the opposite is shown. The vast majority of the chefs in Gusteau's restaurant in Paris, the main restaurant in the movie, are male, and there's only one female, and that's Chef Colette. Chef Linguini is the main character, or one of the main characters at least, and he is an employee at Gusteau's, and he's actually being mentored by Chef Colette. And honestly, in American society, people think that a man is always there to guide the woman, while In reality, in this movie, Chef Colette, the woman, is mentoring a man, and she is not passive, contradictory to the American statement that women are usually more passive. And she shows this non-passive behavior by holding Linguini's coat down to the table using kitchen knives. It's surprising that a woman would partake in these actions that are seen as not as dominant, and so that's how this counters that statement of women being passive and non-dominant. In conclusion to the above statements, the media does create stereotypes. Showing the men doing harder jobs like heavy lifting and ripping up walls and fixer-upper creates the stereotype of men being stronger and more able than women. The same media shows examples of women doing less strenuous jobs like decorating to support that stereotype. It shows that women are seen as less able and less competent than men at their jobs. Media also reinforces these stereotypes when one tries to go for a job that society doesn't see as fit for them. And this relates to the example of Anila Raya going into the alcohol business where more men work, and often where she was thought that she was less competent than men at her job, even if she did a better job. The media reinforcing the stereotypes keeps not only Americans, but anybody exposed to this media to believe the stereotype is a truth. Not all media, however, does follow a conventional stereotype, and some criticize gender roles and stereotypes by way of expressing the contrary through their ways of media. A woman being a less passive leader, or more of a guide in this instance of Ratatouille's case, is shown by Chef Colette in Ratatouille. By expressing the contrary, people are exposed to a different way of believing and often begin to rethink the ethics of presented stereotypes.